My presentation will relate back to what many people have talked about here earlier today. And obviously it will be related to landscape architecture and the work that I've been doing in this field. I borrowed the image from this event, and I think it'll be very interesting to take part in discussions here and contribute with a perspective which is coming from originally, from my point of view, then I'm coming from starting my interest in sound started with music, and then gradually I started to realize as I was studying landscape architecture and that there was a lot of things that could be implemented that we could use in designing cities and parks and other places if we took the experiential perspective, which is kind of what music represents for me. A lot of the work previously had been focusing on noise measured by sound pressure levels, and I thought it was very interesting to kind of dwell into the relationship. What about if we consider sound as a quality? And this is exploration that has been going on and so often referred to as the soundscape approach, the soundscape movement. And I did a PhD in 2017 on this topic called Sound in Landscape Architecture, a soundscape approach to noise, and examining different kind of approaches to work with noise and sound from an experiential point of view. And I collected some of these examples on gradually as I was working with noise on a webpage called soundscapedesign.info. So I think it's important to have examples for practice, to always have a connection. And part of the project was to build a design intervention, and this is from Malmö in St. Knut's Torg, as you can see. I think this image kind of illustrates the basic idea of the kind of epitomizes the soundscape approach or the soundscape movement. We have a noise source, and then we screen it with an intervention which is kind of aesthetically integrated into the landscape, and then we also add sounds of nature in this case, which is because the screens will not take away all the noise, so we have to add some masking sounds of, in this case, water and sounds of forests. And so after working with, after the thesis, I also spent a year in Japan working with the gardens in Japan. And so I've been having a lot of opportunity to come in contact with noise and how we can work with it. And come up with 5 challenges. Well, I'll give a brief run through of these 5, and the first one is to go beyond sound pressure levels, and as we have seen, this has already been done in various ways, but I think there is a need to further uncover types of noises and their characteristics. We've seen there are kind of different kinds of aircraft noise and traffic noise and so forth, but there's also a kind of social noise which has been given quite little attention, I think. There's also a possibility to go into physical qualities of sound to further understand the notion of rhythm. Rhythm is, we saw in the windcraft example, there is a kind of frequency which is kind of adding to the disturbance. So there are many different kind of these things that I think could be further uncovered. And in doing so, I think that we'll come to the conclusion that we can acknowledge that some of these noises that we sometimes arbitrarily refer to as noise may also contribute with an experiential quality. And I think particularly interesting in this regard is what is starting to be called urban vibrancy, which is the notion that there is some sort of life in the cities is often kind of related to the notion of noise. And this is an example from my postdoc in Japan, where a lot of the time I spent there, I investigated garden design and how sound is considered in traditional Japanese gardens, and it's quite interesting. There's a juxtaposition because a lot of these gardens are located in very dense urban cities, like Tokyo, for instance, and in Kyoto, where most of the famous gardens are located. So these pictures are just 35 meters apart from each other, and quite noisy street going outside Murinan garden, and then inside the garden. The garden wall screens the noise and then reducing the sound pressure level, but there is also a lot of water feature which adds a kind of masking effect, and also the framing of the visual space adds to kind of keeping the attention within the garden. So there are multisensory aspect to noise also. How are different other senses than sound influence the perception of noise? There is a relation to Gestalt psychology here as well. And challenge 4 is to understand the relationship between noise, behavior, and social communication. And this is a very interesting aspect, and I think quite complex, because obviously a lot of human communication is done by sound. So if the sound pressure level starts to rise, it's become increasingly difficult. We have to raise our voices to communicate, and this is of course, could be regarded as a negative impact on sound, but in this Paley Park, which is a famous example of a masking, a park which masked urban noise with water, the sound from this waterfall is quite loud, up to 75 decibel if we go really close. And William White, who studied this in the 70s and published in 1980, said that people who were using this space tended to appreciate it because it was so loud that they could have a privacy, so they could not hear what other people around them were saying, and they could have a private conversation. So there is this also complexity related to noise. And this leads into the final slide here, which kind of is a challenge associated with how, when it is so complex, how can we design with consideration for noise? I have used the Enraged Musician here by William Hogarth from 1741 to illustrate the kind of complexity with working with noise. How can we design for noise if there are so many aspects? I mean, the composer here is, or the musician, he's clearly very disturbed by all the sounds from the urban street outside, but for the people taking part in that activity, the noise is perhaps a very good experience, and also for someone who appreciates the notion of urban vibrancy. So I think there are some very important questions that need to be discussed if we can in order to make proper implementations from the soundscape perspective, and also taking into consideration noise, not least the notion of health effects, which is could be quite problematic. And yes, that's what I hope to be able to further discuss during these 2 days. So thank you for